Happy Friday, Grace family, and a happy casual Friday to my friend Kim Schultz. Today in the Word, we're going to be at Job chapter 1, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs. So you can turn to Job chapter 1. A couple of things I want to share with you before we get into the Word today. Number one is that this is Daylight Savings Time weekend, right? So we're going to fall back. So don't forget to do that. Also want to let you know that in a few weekends here at Grace Lutheran Church, we're going to be having our fall voters meeting, and we'll be talking about governance change, and we'll be also electing leaders. So if you have any questions about that voters meeting, make sure you take a look at the communication that you are receiving. If you have any questions, contact our current church council. You can also call here at the church office. But let's take a look at Job chapter 1. We'll be looking at the end of Job chapter 1. To orient us where we're at, a lot of things happen early in the book of Job. Job had many material, physical accumulation of wealth. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. He had 500 yoke of oxen. He had 500 female donkeys. He had a lot of different servants, and he also had feasts with his family very often. And then Job ended up losing those. His oxen and his donkeys were stolen. His servants were killed. His sheep and his servants died in a fire. Camels were stolen. Other servants were killed. His sons and his daughters died in a house that had collapsed. And that's the situation we find Job in at the end of chapter 1. So here's Job chapter 1, verses 20 through the end of the chapter. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That's the end of Job chapter 1. We're talking about how do we respond. We've talked about being proactive, loving, tangibly developing a relationship. But now we want to know, well, how do we respond to all that's going on within ourselves? And we looked at God's gift of lament. And this is what Job does. Considering all that Job had, and then all that Job lost, he tore his robe, a sign of deep grief and mourning. He shaved his head, a sign of deep grief and mourning, and he fell on the ground. And verse 20 says that he worshipped. What's the content of his worship? Job was not singing, I have joy, 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 joy down in my heart. The content of his worship is found in verse 21. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In his worship, it's a recognition of how God brought him into the world. It's a recognition that God as God gives, and God as God takes away. And that God, in his role as God, is to be praised and glorified and loved and turned to by his people. There's an aspect, oftentimes in the Christian church, of worship that's missing, and that is God's gift of lament. As we look at all that's going around in our world, all that's happening in our communities and our families, all the difficulty, one thing that the Christian church could recover is God's gift of lament, which means that we turn to God in our grief and in our sorrow. And as Job, we fall on the ground and we worship. We recognize God, who he is for us, and take all that we're struggling with within and we pour it out before him in worship. And Christian worship can be full of sorrow and grief, dirges. Have we lost the gift of lament in American Christian worship? Have we lost that as individual believers in the Lord, how God grants us an opportunity to come before Him with sadness, with grief, with sorrow. You see, the faithful of God know where to go with everything that they encounter. One of the ways that we can respond to all that's going around us is to turn to God and to lament. When is the last time you in your grief and you in your sorrow spent time in deep prayer? When is the last time you sang a song of sorrow to God? With all that we're going on, all that we're going through and all that is going on, let's seek to respond to it with lament before our God, just as Job did. Because remember, lament is a gift from God to us to utilize when we're wondering, how do we respond to all that's going on around us? Have a wonderful Friday. God bless you all.